This is the Renew Hub, home to one of India's leading renewable energy producer, Renew Power. A position we achieved while growing several times faster than the renewable energy industry in India as a whole since our inception.
There were really two pressing issues that faced humanity at that point in time. The first was the issue of climate change, and the second was the issue of energy requirements for a fast-growing country like India. The idea was to leave behind a clean and sustainable planet for our future generations.
Armed with this philosophy, we are a renewable energy producer focused on utility-scale wind and solar energy projects, as well as distributed solar energy projects. We started with a small project of 25 megawatt. Since then, we've come a long way, becoming one of India's leading renewable energy producer. A key component of our growth is a strongly diversified operational footprint spread across multiple resource, geography, off-takers and vendors. Our project selection is disciplined and focused on delivering reliable long-term returns. We operate and maintain our projects at the highest levels through robust execution capabilities and O&M procedures. We have an efficient capital structure with access to a range of project finance and debt instruments. We have a highly experienced management team, and our people are our strength.
As we go on building a sustainable organization, it is very important that we get the right people on board. In particular, we believe that engaging the next generation is critical.
We are committed to the development and adoption of clean energy technologies through innovative research facilitated by industry-academia partnerships. We value all our partnerships and do our bit to light up the lives of those at the grassroots. As we grow and earn accolades, the greatest one continues to be our role as a key contributor to India's renewable energy growth and helping reduce its carbon footprint.
It is imperative for India to achieve energy self-sufficiency, and I see Renew Power playing an extremely important role in meeting those targets. We want to lead by example and leave behind a cleaner, sustainable planet for our future generations. That is the mission that we at Renew Power are embarked upon.
Hi, Sumant. Welcome to the discussion. So, as you can imagine, the Hurun report's core DNA is a lot of research. So we're not like a traditional media company who does a lot of interviews, but what we really like about is to talk to entrepreneurs such as yourself. And what we try and do is to talk about the stories of modern India through the eyes of entrepreneurs such as yourself. And it's an honor that you could have joined us today, and welcome to our discussion. So it'll be more like we both having a conversation, and possibly everybody can chip in and they can listen and they can ask questions if they have, and we keep talking. Once again, welcome to the discussion.
Sure, thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, the chat is structured around your journey, and so we've classified the whole discussion to various phases of your journey, starting from takeoff, your turning point, possible turbulences that you would have faced. Possibly we are facing one right now because of the virus issue and so on. So, and then you could possibly elaborate a bit on each part of your journey, and I can possibly ask deeper questions later as we proceed.
Sure.
So the first part is the takeoff bit, right? That's when. So how did you take off? How did the idea really come up? And it's definitely not one of those sectors that people would otherwise even think about getting into. Just a good example is we do something called the Hurun Global Unicorn Report, which is a compilation of unicorns globally. There are only 2 renewable power generator companies in the whole the unicorn list, and one is yours. So that kind of shows that it's a very possibly a difficult sector to be in, and you jumped right into it. Now, how did you think about it? How did you start, and what is the whole process?
Well, I had always wanted to do something on my own eventually. I had been working in the corporate world, in investment banking in the US earlier, and then in the corporate sector in India. But I had always had this desire to go off and jump off, into entrepreneurship and do something by myself. But I didn't know really what that might be. In 2007, when I was working in the Aditya Birla Group as the CFO, in fact, I had helped them start a large retail organization, which Mr. Birla had then asked me to go on and set up. And actually, that was the first time that I actually got the taste of starting up something and then running it. And then in 2007, I got a call from a company called Suzlon, which was at that time one of the world's biggest turbine manufacturing companies, one of the wind turbine companies. And when I thought about whether it made sense for me to work with them or to join them, I thought about the sector itself. And at that time, back in 2007, I had the general sense that climate change was going to become a very big issue for us many years down the road, and that it would therefore throw up a lot of opportunities, either for a career or for potentially even finding something entrepreneurial to do in that sector eventually. But what it might have been, I really didn't know at that point in time. And so, just on the back of that general premise that the area of climate change was a good area to be in, is when I actually jumped into joining Suzlon in 2008. But as it always happens, these things never really work out the way you actually planned them to. And by the time I ended up leaving the Birla Group and joining Suzlon, the global financial crisis hit literally within a month after I joined Suzlon. And at that time, renewable energy as a whole had been driven by a lot of liquidity in the system. As you know, at that time, everything was going, people were investing in all sorts of different asset classes, and renewable energy was one of those asset classes. And so, therefore, when the financial crisis hit and liquidity got sucked out from all sectors, it also got sucked out from the renewable energy sector. And that led to a fairly long hiatus in the sector. And I found that Suzlon, for all the positioning that it had, for all the nimbleness that it had also levered itself up quite substantially in terms of making some acquisitions. And so when I was there for 2 years, it was actually a very deep learning experience for me. And I got to learn all about the renewable energy sector while I was there. But I also knew that I probably wouldn't be able to stay at Suzlon for very much longer, just given the turbulence that was happening in the sector. And just around that time, in 2008 or 9, is when the Indian government started realizing also that we had as a country had to have more clean energy in the system, and they came out with certain incentives for companies one step downstream of Suzlon, to actually set up actual renewable energy capacity and become renewable energy IPPs going forward. Until then, we'd had IPPs, which are independent power producers in the thermal energy sector, but nothing in the renewable energy sector because it was so nascent and so new. And so they came out with some new policies that allowed companies like renewable energy IPPs to start basically getting set up and so on. And because I was at Suzlon, I saw that happening. And because I had worked in the renewable energy sector, I felt that this was an opportunity for me to jump off from Suzlon and start something in this sector by myself. And that's really what I did. I left Suzlon in 2010, so I was there for literally only about a year and a half. And I started Renew Power, and with the intention of eventually trying to create a company which would set up, at that point, wind energy assets primarily. And given the fact that these assets are very capital intensive, financing has a very big role to play in that. And because I had been an investment banker where I'd been helping companies raise capital in the international markets and in the domestic markets, therefore I had a bit of a background in that also. So I felt this unique opportunity where I had this background of both fundraising as well as understanding renewable energy. And I felt therefore that I had the skill sets to actually go off and try and make a success of this. And that's what I did. That's why I left and I started off this company.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So if it was to happen now, amidst all this crisis, would you have done things separately? Would you have taken a step back and, oh no, I should not start now. I should possibly wait for some more time to just get the assets to cheapen up and then get in. What would you have thought differently in terms of taking off if you were to start right now?
No, I probably wouldn't have. And the reason is that, you can keep waiting for the right time, but
Hmm.
there is never the right time. Or the other way to look at it is that any time is the right time. I think whenever you do it is the right time. And I think as an entrepreneur, that's the approach and the view that you need to have. If you keep waiting and analyzing endlessly, then you'll never get there. Keep in mind that there was one more thing I realized, and that was that renewable energy was a very early sector at the time that I left Suzlon and started this company. And I also realized that if I wait for somebody else to prove the fact that this can be done, then it'll already be too late, right?
Yeah.
Because and therefore being an entrepreneur or getting into entrepreneurship, there's a fundamental aspect of it, and that is that you have to take risk. The moment you wait for a proven model, that means it's already too late. And so the funny thing is that when I started off doing this, as I told you, I had a renewable energy background, I had a financing background, and I took the decision after some degree of deliberation, but I also in some ways jumped into it. And I thought I was very early. I thought that this whole sector was just starting off. But you'll be surprised to know that there were at least another 10 to 15 people that had exactly the same idea that I had, that did not even have a background in renewable energy, and yet saw the opportunity and therefore jumped in. And therefore, one of my realizations was that you can't wait for somebody else to prove it, because by that time, if 15 people start when you start, when the thing has not been proven, then by the time it's proven, there are probably 500 people, and then it's for sure too late. So you have to take risk, you have to get in early, and that is the only way in which you can get differentiation from other people. Now, of course, it may be that you have an idea or a technology or something that is unique or so novel that timing doesn't really matter, because that whole opportunity is unique and specific to you. But in most people's cases, that is not the case, right? And so therefore you really have to assume that the earlier you start, the better it is, and therefore by definition you're taking that much more risk. And I think that's really what entrepreneurship is all about.
So this brings to the next part. So I'm trying to make it a little more dramatic by putting the faces of the journey under the screen. So the next part is the fuel to the whole thing, right? So what were the kind of inspirations or role models or stories that really made you, take all these decisions? Were there any inspirations behind it?
The strange thing is that I don't come from a background or a family in which there were many people in business. First of all, and when I say business, I mean the corporate sector. I come from a family where the done thing was to join the government, become a government servant, join the IAS or some other government service, and then for 30 years keep working in the government, and then if you were lucky, retire in some sort of a senior position. And so in some ways, in my whole extended family, that is really what is considered to be the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so when I did my MBA, I was one of the first. I was actually the first person in my family to do an MBA, and then I joined the corporate sector. And so for me, there were no real role models in that line of work, at least as far as my extended family was concerned. But the whole concept of jumping off and doing something different and taking risk is something that I saw my father do. My father, who'd actually, funnily enough, been in the IAS for many years, chose to give it all up suddenly one random day and pursue his own passion. And his own passion was politics. And so he just gave a safe and secure life up and just jumped into it and said, "This is what I want to do with my life." And that's what he did. He ended up being pretty successful, and that's terrific for him. But the learning for me was that you can't, if you want to do well in your life, or if you want to do interesting things, or if you want to differentiate yourself, then, or if you want to get off the beaten path, then you have to jump off and do something totally different. You have to push yourself out from your comfort zone. And the problem is that too many people, far too many people, just get very comfortable where they are. And therefore, they end up, in my mind at least, underachieving against their potential. Whereas
Yeah.
if they take a risk, if they jumped off, if they'd done something different, they might have done so much more or achieved so much more in terms of creating new things, creating new businesses, or even exploring themselves in different ways. And it doesn't have to be that you have to do business. You could, maybe you want to become an artist. Maybe you just leave your secure job and become an artist. And perhaps, who knows, you become the next MF Hussain, right? So there are many different ways in which you can take risk with your life. I took a certain kind of risk, and in that sense, I had a role model in or an example rather in my father's place to look at.
Yeah, that's correct. And so you took off. I mean, your father was a role model, and so as you moved forward, did you come across a speed breaker or something that really stopped you in between? Not like a big challenge, but something like a at the initial stage, right? And how did you come across it? How did you handle it? And yeah, and you were fortunate to have the dual advantage of having the background in renewables and also the fundraising experience. But
Yeah.
did you face the initial speed breakers? I'm sure a lot of the entrepreneurs, just myself, or we would definitely face speed breakers when we started off. So how did it all?
Listen, you
Yeah,
can't, you can't, you can't. So one of the lessons I learned very early in life, the first thing I had to do was to go and, I hired a few people with my own money. I had a team of maybe 10 people. Because I was from the sector, I had some degree of credibility. I went and I built a pipeline of projects. And then I had to do what every entrepreneur has to do, which is that I had to go and look for funding. And because ours is a capital intensive sector, therefore, the amount of money that I needed to raise was actually very large. So I remember the first thing the projects I had put together, I needed to raise about $60 million for that finance, for in terms of total equity financing. And when I went to the VCs, because I was literally a startup company at that time, the VC said, we like you a lot, but you know what? This is just too much money. We're used to a Series A and Series B and Series C and then D and then whatever else. And so $60 million all at the same time, you gotta be kidding me, right? So they just sort of ruled themselves out. And so I went to the private equity guys, and the private equity guys said, $60 million is fine with us, but dude, you've just started. It's just too early for us to be putting this kind of money into such a small young company. And so I realized that I was falling between two stools. I didn't really fit well into the VC category, nor did I fit well into the private equity category. And that whole process of fundraising was actually much harder than I had anticipated. And this is after I knew almost every private equity guy in Bombay because of my role in the Birla Group. And I had been the CFO. I knew all these guys personally very well. So getting to meet them and getting to talk to them was not difficult for me. But it's still just the whole construct of what I was looking for was very difficult, and it took me a lot of effort. And it didn't help me that at that time, something very random happened to me, which is I had a retinal detachment of all things. Right, one of my eyes suddenly had a problem, and for that, I had to doctors told me that, look, Sumant, you can't move for the next 2 months. You have to sit in the same place, and you can't move your eyes. You can't move your head. And so suddenly, for 2 months, in the middle of this fundraising process, I was suddenly confined to my home, and I couldn't move around at all. And these are things that you can't anticipate, right? Things come and hit you from left field. You can't anticipate it. And you just have to be flexible enough and resilient enough and perseverant enough that you just pick yourself up and keep going. And and so very early on, I realized that, finally, I was lucky that Goldman Sachs came through and decided to fund us. But one of the things I realized at that point was that as an entrepreneur, the second lesson is that you have to be prepared for failure. There is nothing that says that you are the one that is going to be successful. For every one successful entrepreneur, there'll be 20 guys who will not do well. And you could be one of those 20 guys, right? While all of us, of course, hope that we are that one guy out of the 20 who'll be successful, where does it, there's no gospel truth, there's no book that says you are that guy. It could be somebody else. So you have to be prepared for failure. And and therefore you need to have backup options, and you need to have a safety net. I think that is very important as well.
So if you weren't, let's say, pursuing, let's assume that you hit the initial speed breaker, and if you were to, it's a hypothetical question. If you were to stop somewhere, what other sector would you have gotten into? Would you still have continued in renewable? I mean, that being your background and passion, would you just have continued in the same sector?
Thank God that's a hypothetical question. And I didn't have to face that question because I really would not, I don't know what I would have done. Frankly, I would have, I probably would have had to wind up. If I had not been able to raise capital, I would have just had to wind up what I was doing. And then I would have had to think long and hard about my next step. Fortunately, I didn't have to get to that point.
I mean, these are the kind of
I think,
questions. Yeah, sorry.
yeah.
Carry
No,
on,
no.
please,
What I
please
was
carry
saying
on.
is that look, I think the fundamental question that you're asking is beyond the initial speed breaker. I think the reality is that as an entrepreneur, you have to be prepared for the fact that many things will come and hit you that you cannot anticipate at the time that you start. And you need to have the ability of being able to solve problems when they arise. And if they knock you down, you just have to get up and just keep going because there will be problems aplenty. And as you alluded to today's problem, who could have anticipated this, right? And there must be
Yeah.
so many startup entrepreneurs who must be suffering through this issue, wondering whether their businesses are going to survive or not. Nobody could have anticipated this. So the reality is that as an entrepreneur, it's a tough life, and you have to work very hard to be successful.
Okay. And the next question is, okay, you uh, took off, got the fuel, you did the speed breakers and stuff, and now, what was the real turning point in your business? Which is where, which really took you from, let's say, X to Y. That kind of exponential growth. What was that single most turning point? I'm
I
sure there were
won't say that
many.
there was. No, I would
Yeah.
say there was one single turning point where suddenly there is a eureka moment, and we suddenly, went from nothing to everything. I can't remember anything like that, but there were two, three things I would say that I would like to mention that I learned as I went through the journey that were very important. Number one is the importance of corporate governance. Uh, you know, in the beginning when I started off, ours is an infrastructure sector, and you know how infrastructure tends to work in India. And therefore, right in the beginning of having started this business, I was confronted with this reality, and I thought long and hard about what I was doing this for, and what was my value system. And I realized that I could only do some, things that were absolutely straight and above board. I could not do anything even slightly tira mera. And some people would say that I was naive in thinking that way, but I realized that for me the means were as important as the ends, and therefore there was no sense in doing something or creating something where I had used methods that may have been the norm, but did not agree with who I was as a person. And so I took that decision very early on, and then I started hiring people who believed in that same philosophy and who are willing to work in that same with that same mindset. And what I realized is that as we continue to sort of grow and expand, that uh, fundraising became a lot easier because people realized we started, we built a certain reputation, and people talk about you, right? And your vendors talk about you, the people that you borrow from talk about you, the people that you give orders to talk about you, and so on. And so we began to build a certain reputation for ourselves, and that reputation was something that investors could diligence, and that I think helped us really in building or creating the ability of raising more capital as we went forward. So investors are very comfortable investing in our company because of the clean corporate governance. And that is something I had not anticipated at the time that I took the decision to have good corporate governance. But I realized it was an outcome of that whole thing. And now, 10 years later, after having started this company, you know we have a very good reputation in the market, and for me that is as important as creating value is. So for me, it's important that people see us doing the right things in the right way, as much as creating value, and I think investors appreciate that. So I think that is one thing that I learned along the journey. The second thing I realized was ambition. I think as an entrepreneur, you need to be ambitious. If you're not ambitious, you will not be driven. You will not be able to compete with people who are out there because other people are going to be ambitious and they will be driven. And so, therefore, you have to basically go out there with a view that you will get it done, that you will outcompete the other guys, and that you will create a better company than anybody else can create. And if you don't have that mindset, then it's very easy to get satisfied. When you do your first fundraising, when you hire your first 100 people, when you invest your first 1,000 crores, you can say, you know what, that's it, I'm done, and this is what I had signed up to do. And as an entrepreneur, you can't really set your sights very high because in the beginning you're simply fighting for survival. So if you just cross that survival phase, you can say, you know what, pat myself on the back, I'm done. Or you can say, you know what, I'm going to just keep going, because as an entrepreneur, this is a never ending journey, right? And whatever achievements I have are now behind me, and I'm only going to look to the future. So a lot depends on ambition. And there was one phase in our growth, and keep in mind we're an hard infrastructure creation on the ground company. There's one phase in our evolution of about 3 years where we actually where we doubled in size every year for 3 years. So we grew 8x in a matter of 3 years. We went from an installed capacity of 500 megawatts with about, let's say, 3,000 crores of assets on the ground, okay, to becoming a 4,000 megawatt company with close to about 30,000 crores of assets on the ground. Okay, so that in 3 years. So every year we doubled our size. So that
Yeah.
only came because we were ambitious and we wanted to get it done. So I think that is a very critical imperative as well. And the third thing I would say that is very important is you have to build the right company. All too often entrepreneurs get focused on creating a product or creating a service, but we equally have to create a company as well. And if we don't create a company, we will not have a sustainable business. So you have to really get the right people. You have to have the right processes, the right systems, the right risk management, the right board, the right governance, the right culture, the right values. Uh, all of those things have to be really, really worked upon. Because if you don't work upon those, then you can be sure that at some point your company's ability to grow will run out of steam. And then, you have to start stretching. And at some point, something is going to go wrong because your company's ability to handle all that, your company's bandwidth would not have grown, and your business would have grown larger, and you'll start making mistakes. So creating the company's ability to grow is very critical as well.
Yeah. So now that you are in the journey, right? I have a couple of questions
Sure.
to ask you. So which is the one startup or or one company from the new age entrepreneurs that you like the most? Is there any specific name that's there?
Yeah, there is. It's a guy from our sector, and I mean it's no secret. The guy I really admire is Elon Musk, and the
Okay.
reason I admire him, yeah, the reason I admire him because of two, three reasons. One, the guy has phenomenal vision, right? He has phenomenal ambition, which is one of the things that I've told you is very critical.
Yeah.
And he has the technological smarts where he can actually go in and solve problems in a way that nobody else can solve, right? So he's a creator of products. I mean, look at the Tesla. Um, I don't know whether you've ridden in a Tesla or not, but if you ride in a Tesla,
Yeah.
it's just mind blowing. It's a mind blowing experience. So forget
Yeah.
it being an electric car. That's almost like a sideshow to the main event, which is that this is a phenomenal sports car, right? It drives so well. So I think that ability to create something from scratch, right, and then build a whole superstructure of a company around it, right, and couple along with that phenomenal marketing savvy. I think he's got the all round package. I think that's the thing I admire about him. And he takes
Anybody in
very
India?
big problems.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody in
Yeah.
India as an entrepreneur, the one guy, again, nothing, no rocket science about this, is most likely Uday Kotak. And the
Yeah.
reason Uday Kotak, he's in a totally different area, but he had a small NBFC operation many years ago, let's say 20 years ago when he started off, and he got the NBFC, he got a banking license, and then he's created a phenomenal company where he's
True.
now the second largest, second or third largest bank in the country. And he's, that takes some doing. And you just see the end result, but behind that, he's created a company, he's created a team, he's created processes and systems, he's created a certain philosophy and a culture, and a certain risk management framework, right? And so that is only what has allowed that company to grow so sustainably over time. And so that's the kind of thing that I really admire, taking an opportunity and creating something really dramatic out of it.
I mean, you're very right about it. I mean, we work with the Kotak on promoting women entrepreneurship, trying to create a top 100 women's list and so on. And we work directly with the leadership team. The culture that Uday has built in Kotak is fantastic. It's really something that just sitting with them, you learn a lot and you take back, oh, this we should possibly do it in our company. So that's definitely there. The next question is, right, so we do something called the Global Unicorn Report. The number of unicorns in India compared to, let's say, we're still the number 3 in the world in terms of the number of unicorns. But let's say compared to China and the US, we possibly, there's a huge gap to really, fill in. Now, what could be potentially be the reason for that? Is it because India is a young country, or is it because the lack of funding? What do you think that what India requires to really fill the gap in terms of creating more and more billion-dollar enterprises? Because not everybody could be as experienced and knowledgeable as you
No,
are.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And look, in some ways, you can argue that we've been lucky, but it's not everybody's cup of tea to get into the infrastructure sector in India and try to create hard assets on the ground when dealing with the Indian ecosystem. It's not an easy process. So no, look, I think it's a very important and relevant question that you've asked. I think there are many aspects to it. Okay, the first and foremost is the issue of Indian culture. I think that and I think it's because of our in some ways India is a middle class country, right? And therefore we all have grown up with middle class values, and those middle class values don't really encourage risk taking. We're all told to कि बच्चे पढ़ो ठीक से, नौकरी करो कहीं जाके, get a steady paycheck, do all of those things. So and failure in some ways is frowned upon. And so if you leave your job and start something and it doesn't do well, A, what are you going to do? Do you have a safety net? B, your family, extended family is going to look at you and say, oh, what a poor guy, etc. So we don't really say, look, this guy is doing a terrific job. He's done one startup. He may not have worked, but I'm sure his third or fourth startup, he's gonna hit a jackpot. So we don't have that attitude. So I think that is one. We don't encourage our young folks to take risk. The second thing is, you're right that the funding ecosystem is weak in India. It has developed a lot over the last few years, but it still has probably a long way to go. So I think that is the second aspect. And the interface between potential entrepreneurs and VCs is probably still somewhat weak. The third thing is that, all said and done, the Indian economy is not that large. We are a fifth the size of China as an economy in dollar terms. And so therefore, I would imagine that the number of opportunities as a result of that are also fewer. And so therefore, you will have fewer startups just as a result of that as well. And lastly, I would say that there are certain sectors of the economy which are, um, or let me put it a different way. Most of the startups in India are in the e-commerce space. You
Yeah,
are in the
that's right.
internet space. You hardly have any startups in the real economy, like our business, for example. There are very few startups, and the reason for that is that it's incredibly hard to do business in India. E-commerce has very little interface with the government. You're dealing mostly with end customers and competitors and so on. But in businesses like ours or businesses in the real economy, getting approvals, dealing with the Indian bureaucracy, dealing with the hassle of doing business day to day, those are not easy things. And that, I think, dissuades a lot of people from really starting up businesses that deal with solving actual problems in the real world. And not that the internet world is not real. It is, of
Yeah.
course, real, but where hard assets or hard products are involved. Let me put it. So I think that ease of doing business in India really needs a lot of improvement. And it's a systemic thing. It's not to do with any one government or the other. It's just the way that our whole governance framework has been set up, which includes not just the bureaucracy or the politicians, but also the judiciary. Getting contractual enforcement, for example, is very hard. So you can't get things resolved quickly. So I think those are all issues that we have to face in India when doing business.
Yeah, that's true. And then one of the fields that we've added in our unicorn report from this,
Mhm.
we're launching it next week, is whether the company is making a physical product. So that would be an interesting thing to track about, and could be a good messaging to the government as well in terms of giving a comparison between India and the rest of the world. The next question is on the landing. Now we've completed the entire journey and we're landing, and of course we've got miles to go before we land. But one day, at the end of your journey, right? Where do you, how do you, what do you want to be known as, and what are your, how would you, what is your whole purpose of life, purpose of existence? What would you want to be known as?
You're asking me some very philosophical and very difficult questions.
We have all the
But
time these days.
that's your job. Look, I have thought long and deep and hard about it. Okay, and for every entrepreneur, let me say that there is a fundamental question that shows up in at some point in their lives, and that is, you've created something. Somebody's probably willing to give you decent value for it at some point. Should you just sell out and get out? And then maybe either create something else or take a long vacation or just spend time with family or go and do social work or something? Or should you just keep working on building your business? And in that, maybe sometimes the value goes up, sometimes it goes down, and you just carry on through all of that, right? And I I mean, my view fundamentally is that I don't want to just give this whole thing up midway. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, I don't think that you've finished your job by just starting something and then selling it at some point in time. Okay. Uh, to me, that's unfinished business. The second and more relevant thing is that as you go across your journey, right, when you start, you're at a very low level, right? So your vision is limited by what you can see from that low level. And so therefore you're only thinking about survival, or you're thinking, maybe in my case, let's say the first 100 megawatts or this first 200 megawatts. But then when you drop those points, then you start seeing 1,000 megawatts or 1,500 megawatts. Then you cross that and you start seeing 5,000, 6,000 megawatts. Then you cross that and you start seeing 10,000 megawatts or 20,000 megawatts. And then you realize, you know what, if I get to that number, I'll be this large a company in India or this much in the world. And then you say, you know what, I'm not that far from that point. And if I've been able to get this journey going up till this point, perhaps if I keep going for a little bit longer, maybe I can get to that point as well, right? And create something that really is a lasting legacy, where you create something that is really sustainable in the long run, that survives the test of time. So to your point about what would I like to be known as, or what would I like to have happen to me, I'd like to be known as the person who founded and created one of the best run and best known renewable energy companies in the world. That would be my ambition. Okay, and that doesn't mean that you have to be the biggest, but it does mean that you need to be the highest quality in terms of the returns you give to your shareholders, in terms of the reputation that you enjoy, in terms of the quality of your assets, in terms of the quality of the organization, and so on. So there are many other dimensions of being really, really good. And I really want to make sure that that is an area that I really work hard upon. And the other thing I've realized is that this is a never-ending journey. It's at some point you decide that, look, the organization is not good enough to keep going without you, and maybe that is a time when at least I would be okay about hanging up my boots.
I'll just take two questions from the viewers. I'll just put it on the screen. The first question is from Hamali. Of course, he says it's a very inspiring discussion for sure. I would like to know more about how the climate change awareness wave is affecting the future of renewables with respect to support from society and the government.
Okay.
That is the first
Well,
question.
yeah. Okay. So look, I think that when we started off our business, climate change was a very important driver of it, because obviously renewables is more expensive, and I'm talking about 6 7 years ago. Renewables was more expensive than thermal power, And so therefore societal support and governmental support for dealing with climate change was a big imperative and a big supporter of growth in the renewable energy sector. So government policies and so on were tweaked to make sure that renewable energy was supported within the overall power demand sector. But now what's happened is that over the last 3 years or so, that with the advances in technology that we've seen happening both in solar energy and in wind energy, now both solar and wind are actually the cheapest form of new energy. It's cheaper than thermal power, that is coal-based power, it's cheaper than gas, it's cheaper than hydro, it's cheaper than nuclear energy, etc. And so now we really don't need, to that extent, government subsidies or support to push our sector. Now it's the commercial rationale that is pushing our sector forward. And that's terrific, actually. So in a way, we're doing good for society, and there is a very strong commercial reason for it as well now. And that's the best way in which this sector can really continue to grow going forward.
Okay. The next question, we'll take one more question.
Sure.
It's basically, how far do you think does the development initiative contribute to the growth of a company? Is it just a philanthropic thing, or does it add up to the entire the visioning process of an enterprise? Basically, we talk is this could be about the no the sustainability goals that you have in your company. Does it have an overall impact on your corporate strategy? I think that could be the question.
I think, everything that we do has to be steeped in sustainability because we are a clean energy company. And therefore, we certainly can't, on the one hand, propound the fact that, people should adopt clean energy because, in fact, it is not carbon emitting. And at the same time, in our own strategies and day-to-day work, we become a big emitter of carbon, or we do things in a non-sustainable manner. So obviously, we would not like to do that. And so therefore, we have been taking a lot of steps to make ourselves a sustainable company. And for example, our office here in Gurgaon has now been LEED Platinum certified. When we took it, so it's a rented building from DLF, and in fact, we'll be probably one of the very, very few buildings in India which are rented but are LEED Platinum certified by the tenant. We're also moving towards becoming a zero emissions office as well. And then, of course, everything that we do, we try to make sure that we focus on sustainability in terms of the way we do our business on the ground. And then we do a lot of CSR work as well, because it's very important for us to be a good neighbor and to be a good partner in communities where we are operating our businesses right now. So we do a lot of CSR work as well, which you might argue is an aspect of sustainability also.
Yeah, certainly.
That's really what we're doing.
Yeah, I think those are the questions, and thank you very much. I think we covered pretty much the all of your journey so far in our limited time. Possibly when we do a bigger event in offline format, you could speak at our conferences as well.
Okay,
but really, thank you very much. I'm really glad that you could join us, and look forward to meeting you in person very soon. Namaste. Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah. Bye-bye.